everyone. I'm Charles Lee, and on behalf of the Honolulu Zoo and the Honolulu Zoo Society, thank you very much for this opportunity to share the Honolulu Zoo with you. So, without further ado, why don't we get started? You are actually looking at an aerial view of the Honolulu Zoo that covers about 42 acres of Waikiki. We have the distinction of being the only zoo in the United States to have been founded by monarchy. In this case, King David Kalakaua in the 1800s. Of course, our story begins with the birth of the islands. Deep beneath the sea, the Pacific hotspot, a hole in the Earth's crust, allows lava to continuously spill forth. And this volcano continues to build upon itself until after millions of years, it rises above the surface of the ocean. As the lava continues to flow, the island continues to grow. And even millions of years after these eruptions stop, there still may be packets of magma hidden beneath the surface, which violently explode in secondary eruptions, forming some recognizable Hawaiian landmarks, such as Leahi, otherwise known as Diamond Head. And in the shadow of this crater cone sits Kapiolani Park, founded by King Kalakaua for a place for his people to enjoy recreational activities, be it sports or concerts or hula performances, or the Royal Hawaiian family's animal menagerie, which has only continued to grow over the decades. Eventually, in 1947, the city and county of Honolulu made it official, and the Honolulu Zoo was born. At the time, our first director was Dr. Paul Brees, and he went on to lead the zoo through many firsts, not just in our history, but in the history of conservation. For example, we became the first zoo in the world to breed northern cassowaries. That was in 1948. Then in 1953, we became the first to hatch Galapagos tortoises, and some of these animals are still with us today. This is Jaws, by the way. He, along with Kim and Charlotte, are our original generation of Galaps, which arrived in 1929, having been collected as part of the Townsend expedition. And over the decades, dozens of these animals have hatched out at the Honolulu Zoo and have been sent to other zoos around the world to help with their breeding programs. Way back then, these animals were considered endangered due to overharvesting for food. However, captive breeding, along with the restoration of their native habitat and the removal of feral invasive ungulates, have given this species a chance to recover. They're now considered vulnerable, and researchers are even finding hatchling and juvenile Galapagos tortoises back in the wild. Still, it's a good idea for zoos to have backup populations just in case, because as an island species, these animals are vulnerable to natural disasters or sudden changes in their environment. And as a zoo on an island, it makes sense that we focus on island species and island ecosystems. This is Buddy, an Indonesian wrinkled hornbill, born and raised here at the Honolulu Zoo. And we are actually the first zoo in the world to breed Asiatic hornbills. And it turns out the trick was to provide them with the proper nesting sites. In the wild, these large birds prefer large trees with large holes to build their nests in. Unfortunately, they are endangered, and one of the reasons why is due to deforestation. And lacking large trees here at the Honolulu Zoo, our keepers improvised by building them nesting boxes. Obviously, that's worked out perfectly, and we've had a number of different hornbill species hatch out at the zoo. And more importantly, this technique has since gone on to help their relatives in the wild. Even in areas where the habitat has been deforested, researchers can now set up nesting boxes to give wild hornbills a fighting chance to propagate and save their species. Here at the zoo, we like to encourage visitors to save their species by being sustainable, by making sure that when they buy wood products, it comes from areas where these animals are not being threatened and where their habitats are going to remain intact. Here at the Honolulu Zoo, we continue to breed hornbills, and, well, we're actually the only zoo in the United States, to my knowledge, that does breed wrinkled hornbills. And that's a double-edged sword, because that means just about all the other potential mates are already related to Buddy over here. We're actually trying to bring in a mate from France for him. So conservation is a community effort. It's not just one or a few zoos working together. It's many different organizations from across the globe helping to save species. And this is one of my favorite examples, the Neena, the Hawaiian goose, our state bird. It actually became the state bird thanks to thanks to lobbying from Dr. Brees in the 40s and 50s. Back then, there were only about 43 nene left in the entire world. But the zoo was part of a team with the Nene Propagation Project, with the Waterfowl Trust started by Sir Peter Scott in England to breed and release these animals back into the wild. Today, there's 2,000 to 3,000 of them again, and so they're upgraded to vulnerable. Those of you watching on the mainland might think that this bird looks a little bit familiar, and there's good reason for that. Canada geese actually still migrate to the Hawaiian Islands, and we're thinking maybe about 500,000 years ago, some of them decided that, well, since the island has a great climate year-round, why would you ever leave? And so some of them stayed and became nene. A few adaptations this animal has is a smaller body size, as well as less webbing on their toes for a more terrestrial existence. Although, as you can see, they still enjoy the water. Although we no longer need to release them, the Honolulu Zoo continues to breed nene every few years, again, to make sure there's a backup population. We can also send some of our animals to other zoos if need be. And this allows us to protect wild populations so there doesn't need to be any animals removed from their natural habitat. Usually, our zoo only does so in the event of an emergency, such as if that species is critically endangered, or in the case of Makamai, because they were injured and cannot survive on their own. Makamai was actually discovered flying erratically on the island of Kauai, and so it turned out he was blinded in one eye somehow. Because he could no longer hunt on his own, he was given a home here at the Honolulu Zoo. And so he's a pueo, or a Hawaiian short-eared owl. Fun fact about them, they're actually diurnal, which means they're active during the daytime. They also like to build their nests on the ground. Also in Hawaii, pueo are considered the amakua, or family guardians of certain families here in Hawaii. And so there is evidence that at least some people have developed a strong trust account with wild pueo. And you can see we're trying to do that here at the zoo. After several years of patience and a lot of attention, Makamai is now comfortably eating out of our keeper's hands. And again, because he cannot be released back into the wild, we want to make sure that he's living the best life possible here at the Honolulu Zoo. Now, on occasion, though, there are instances where animals can be returned to the wild. And so that's one of the most rewarding parts about being here at the zoo. This is a manuoku, by the way, a Hawaiian fairy tern. And right now, one of our vets, Dr. Emma, is placing it in our release tree. You see, these are seabirds. Although they do hunt fish out at sea, they return to trees to roost and, of course, to nest. Although they actually do not build a nest, they just kind of lay the egg out on the branch, and the chick has to hold on for dear life when it hatches. Now, sometimes during high winds or a storm, these chicks are blown out of the tree. And in that situation, there's a volunteer group called Hui Manuoku, which usually tries to return them to their parents. If that's not possible, however, they can contact the Hawaii Wildlife Center, which in turn will contact us if it's on the island of Oahu. We're able to rear these chicks until they're of fledgling age. Then we can move them from their rearing cages and again, place them on branches for them to get ready to fly. At this time, keepers and volunteers will still continue to feed these fledglings fish, just to make sure they keep their strength up. But usually this is frozen smelt, which isn't the tastiest. And the idea is they want to get sick of this fish, so they go hunt on their own out at sea. What's interesting is we've actually seen unrelated adult pairs of fairy terns come and beckon these fledglings to join them, literally taking these fledglings under their wing to take them out to sea and hunt. And so it's a really rewarding process when these animals are able to return to the wild. Now, because they are seabirds that return to land, we believe that Manuoku, or another seabird, were responsible for leading the first people, for leading Polynesian voyagers to the Hawaiian Islands in the first place. Whether that's true or not, birds have definitely been responsible for helping to introduce new species to the Hawaiian Islands. And not just animals, plants, for example. Seeds will sometimes get stuck on a bird's feathers, or depending on the species, might be eaten by a bird and then pooped out once it lands in the Hawaiian Islands. And it's the same for animals. You're looking at a monstrous cylindrica. And we believe that the ancestor to this animal was actually eaten by a bird, and then because it remained inside its shell, it was able to survive being digested until a bird pooped it out in the Hawaiian Islands. Now, this species is critically endangered. In 2015, only one of them was found in the wild. But the Honolulu Zoo has been working with Department of Land and Natural Resources to breed them in captivity. we've returned over 140 to DLNR who have then released it back into the wild. And although this is not the most impressive looking animal, they do recycle vital nutrients into the soil for native Hawaiian forests to grow. So you don't always have to be flashy like a tiger or elephant to make a positive difference. Here is another endemic species found nowhere else on the planet. You're seeing the pulelehua, or kamehameha butterfly. Now, these are native pollinators, which means that a lot of native plants rely on the butterfly, who in turn relies on native plants. For example, you may know that most butterfly species are picky about where they lay their eggs. They want to make sure that their offspring have something tasty to eat. In this case, these butterflies favor a Hawaiian nettle called mamaki, which, by the way, actually makes a very delicious tea if you happen to drink it. And so at the zoo, keepers such as Becky are checking the mamaki leaves every day to make sure the butterflies are laying their eggs and caterpillars on it. Or in this case, they laid the egg on Becky's shoulder. But in any case, because these larvae are vulnerable, when we find them, our keepers are able to move them to a safe location and constantly monitor them so that they have enough food to grow large. And well, once they're large enough, then they can build a chrysalis. And that chrysalis is then returned to the main exhibit where they can emerge as adult butterflies. And by the way, the ones you're seeing right now, these are females. The easiest way to tell is that the spots on the edges of their wings are white. Males tend to have orange spots. Of course, the next easiest way to tell is that obviously female butterflies are the only ones we know of that lay eggs. And again, although they don't really take care of their offspring, as far as insects go, they do a pretty good job of being parents. They're laying the eggs on the underside of the leaf so that it's harder for predators to find it. And again, like the monstrous cylindrica snails, we were able to start propagating these native Hawaiian species thanks to our partnership with Department of Land and Natural Resources. So conservation is a community effort. Here's another great example. This is Rose, our female Komodo dragon. She's actually from the Bronx Zoo, and she was actually brought to us thanks to the Species Survival Plan, which, for lack of better words, is an international dating service for zoo animals. They actually keep track of individual animals in zoos across the world, as well as their lineages, as well as their family members, to make the best match possible. And this is Boris, by the way. He's our male from the Prague Zoo. And so he was brought here in hopes of breeding with Rose to start a new generation of Komodos at the Honolulu Zoo. So one interesting fact about Boris is, well, he is in the water right now. The thing is, from what we know, wild Komodo dragons, although they can swim, they avoid swimming as much as possible unless they absolutely need to. Obviously, though, Boris isn't living in the wild, he's living in the zoo, and so he does have a bit of leeway and a bit of extra time to explore and discover, well, new hobbies, so to speak. Komodo dragons are very intelligent animals. They do recognize the faces of their favorite keepers, and they have been known to show non-food motivated play behavior. And so, as much as possible, we want to give them and all of our animals a lot of enrichment here at the Honolulu Zoo. Enrichment is anything we can do to make each day different and interesting, whether it's having a training session with them and rewarding them with treats, or giving them puzzle boxes, or hiding their favorite foods so they have to find them. This is a dragon wheel, by the way, that our keepers made. We can put different scents in different holes or hide treats in different holes so that he has to engage and try and figure out where his treats are. And the thing is, this enrichment isn't just great for our animals, but when people are able to see them engaged, people have a good time as well. And that is very important here at the zoo, because when visitors form this kind of emotional attachment, when they see something that they're going to remember for the rest of their lives, they want to help these animals. They want to protect their wild relatives. Now, this is Chrissy. She is a Sumatran tiger, and Sumatran tigers are actually the last of the island tigers. Unfortunately, the Bali and Javan tigers have already gone extinct. And well, you can see these are critically endangered animals. There's probably less than 400 adult Sumatran tigers left in the wild. But again, if people are made aware of this and people form a strong attachment to Chrissy, then they're going to want to help her and her species. And so the biggest threat to all tigers is going to be habitat loss. Although people do hunt them for their skins and body parts, let's face it, these are masters of camouflage. If you're a poacher and you go into a tiger's backyard trying to kill it, there's a good chance you're not going to make it out alive. But cut down their forests, remove their habitat, and then they cannot camouflage anymore. It's going to be a lot harder for them to stay hidden. And because they're from an island, Sumatran tigers are dealing with limited space to begin with. The biggest threat to them is going to be the palm oil trade. For those of you unfamiliar with palm oil, it's an ingredient that you find in a lot of your favorite products, from cookies and candies to cosmetics to soaps and lotions. The thing is, it's not so much the ingredient that's the problem, it's how it's harvested. Companies will go into protected forests and just slash and burn the entire thing to the ground. And so Sumatran tigers are not the only ones who suffer from this. A lot of indigenous peoples are the ones who lose their homes, as well as sun bears, Sumatran rhinos, elephants, hornbills, siamang gibbons, orangutans. And so a lot of animals lose out. But the good news is when you protect that habitat, you're protecting all of these species and peoples. And so the best way people can help is by being smart consumers. We encourage visitors to check the labels of what they're buying in the future. And there are even apps they can download to scan to see if there's palm oil or other unsustainable ingredients. And if the ingredients are unsustainable, then we encourage them to, well, encourage the manufacturers to make a change, to switch away from their unsustainable ingredients and be better producers. And companies in the past have caved to this sort of encouragement. And so we're really hoping that, again, the visitors, the public visitors here at the zoo can help us save these species, because again, conservation is a community effort. And so, few more things. Yeah, just gotta love Chrissy. She's turning 22, by the way, on June 24th. On average, they live about 12 to 13 years in the wild and 17 to 18 years in zoos. And so again, we want to take as much good care of our animals as possible. And so these are some of our conservation partners, by the way. Many of them are local in Hawaii, but some of them are also international, such as, well, the Hanzaki Institute in Japan, or Sandcob in South Africa, or the Komodo Survival Program. And so many of them are actually funded through donations made possible through our Aloha Aina Conservation Fund. However, we're also able to occasionally send keepers out into the field to work with them. This is a Japanese giant salamander, by the way. We have 3 of them from the Asa Zoo in Hiroshima. And again, they, along with the Hanzaki Institute, are one of our conservation partners. And so in the past, we have been fortunate enough to send keepers such as Becky out into the wild to work with their staff to study these animals in their natural habitat. Because the more we can learn about these animals, the better we can take care of them at the zoo, and the better we can hopefully propagate them as well. So far, there has been no zoo outside of Japan that's been able to breed them. Fingers crossed we can be one of the first someday. But again, conservation is a community effort, and hopefully in the future, as things change, people will again be able to come and visit the zoo and form these close attachments to the many animals that live here. And hopefully in the future, you'll be able to do the same, and we would love to have you visit the Hawaiian Islands and the Honolulu Zoo. But until then, thank you very much for this opportunity. We hope you enjoyed this quick tour about the zoo's history and some of our many residents. And again, thank you very much for this opportunity. Aloha.